The joke was the trash can. My name wasn't on the seating chart, not even misspelled or abbreviated, just absent. I thought maybe it was a mistake, a missed entry. So I waited. I stood there in my navy blue dress, holding the small silver clutch I'd bought just for the occasion, staring at the glossy white board that listed every guest with love-curled calligraphy. I found Grandma Judy, who died last February. I found Uncle Pete and Diane, who hadn't spoken to my son since the inheritance dispute. But there was no Mom, no Mrs. Holloway, not even Elaine. I wandered toward the reception tent like a child who'd lost their field trip group. My heels caught in the grass, and the hem of my dress tugged slightly in the wind. I saw the wedding planner whispering with a staffer pointing toward the tables. I lifted a hand slightly not to interrupt, just to draw attention. She glanced up and smiled with sympathy you reserve for someone who's mistaken about their place. "Hi," I said, managing a soft voice. "I think my name's missing from the chart." "Oh," she blinked. "You're James's, his mother?" I said. She made a noise like a tight laugh, as if covering up her own discomfort. "One sec, let me check with the groom." That's when one of the groomsmen, a boy I remembered feeding dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets during sleepovers, leaned in, trying and failing to hide a smirk. He pointed toward the back of the tent. "Hey, I think we've got a throne for you over there, Queen Elaine." I turned. A folding chair stood next to a large trash bin behind the catering station. On the back of the chair, someone had taped a crooked piece of white paper. In glitter gel pen, it read, "Mom Lowell." Laughter rolled out in pockets. Not from strangers. From people I had driven to soccer practice. From girls I had hosted for movie nights. From cousins and co-workers and college friends of James who had once called me Mama H. They laughed with the buoyancy of people who were all in on a joke they didn't have to consider cruel. I didn't sit. Not at first. I just looked at my son. He was standing beside his bride, champagne in hand, grinning like someone watching a prank unfold exactly as planned. His eyes met mine for a half-second. He shrugged and turned away, whispering something to the best man that made them both bend forward with laughter. The bride caught my eye and crossed over. She tilted her head like a concerned nurse. "Oh my God, you're not upset, right? It's just a joke. James said you'd be cool with it." Cool, that's what they thought of me. Not warm, not maternal, not honored or respected or even necessary. Just cool. I sat. I don't know why I sat, but I did. The metal of the chair was cold against my back, and the smell of old food and beer cans swirled around me. A gust of wind lifted the paper sign on the chair and slapped it against my shoulder like it too wanted to humiliate me. Music began. Applause scattered like raindrops. The bridal party paraded in. My son danced with his new wife a curated slow song from Spotify's Timeless Love Songs playlist. People wiped tears from their eyes, and I sat beside a trash can, invisible, but not invisible enough. The worst part wasn't that they laughed. The worst part was that no one stopped it. Not one cousin, not one friend, not one soul who looked over and said, "This is too far." I watched them toast, kiss, and lean in for photographs while I sat with my hands folded in my lap, trying to pretend my face wasn't burning. Someone I don't know who placed a half-empty glass of champagne beside my chair. It wobbled on the soft grass. I didn't touch it. I didn't move. I felt nothing and everything all at once. It was like falling from a great height in a dream. No gravity, no scream, just the cold understanding that something has permanently changed. The only person who noticed me after that was the DJ, who during the dinner break came to throw out an empty water bottle. He saw me and hesitated. Oh, sorry. He paused, like I was part of the scenery. Then he said, "You okay here?" I nodded. Because what else do you do when you've been reduced to a punchline? It had taken me 2 weeks to pick out the dress. 4 hours to drive to the venue. 28 years to raise the man who now laughed as strangers mocked me. The night blurred after that. I remember the clink of silverware, the pop of sparklers outside the tent, the photographer shouting for just the immediate family. They posed in front of the lake. I stayed by the trash. When James was born, I was 24 and certain I'd never feel lonely again. His father left 2 weeks after we brought him home from the hospital. He said he couldn't breathe in the apartment anymore. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor in a blood-stained nightgown, holding James against my chest, milk leaking through both sides of my bra, and thinking, it's just us now. I didn't cry. I just folded into the roll like it had been waiting for me. We lived in a second-floor walk-up over a dry cleaner. The neighbors were loud, the windows were drafty, and every morning I'd boil a pot of water to pour into the tub, just to make the water hot enough for a baby. I worked evenings as a CNA at the nursing home on Eastern Avenue. I took the night shifts, no one wanted the shifts that meant missing bedtime stories, and waking up stiff on the couch after 2 hours of sleep. I brought home discounted diapers from the facility's vendor, and once bartered a pair of gold earrings to cover a late electric bill. But James smiled early. 4 weeks in, his cheeks dimpling like some kind of cosmic reward, and that made every skipped meal and every double shift feel like a small price. I remember holding him against my chest during his first fever, whispering lullabies until sunrise. I'd sit in the pediatrician's waiting room with a notepad writing down questions, like I was preparing for an exam. I once stood in line at the pharmacy for 2 hours to get a prescription he never ended up needing. I lived in service of him. It was never a question. When he turned 10, I picked up a weekend job at a bakery so I could afford to send him to St. Luke's. He was getting bullied at the public school, and he used to come home and pretend everything was fine until I'd find his homework crumpled in the trash. I cleaned sugar off the bakery floors and worked double shifts on Saturdays just to see him come home with stories of debate team wins and new friends who shared their lunch. I missed every date, every girls' night, every invitation to start again. I had suitors men from work, a single dad at the school, but I never let anyone in. James used to tell me I was the best mom in the world. Once, when he was 13 and high from a dental procedure, he clutched my arm and said, "If I ever get married, you're going to be sitting right next to me." And I believed that. Not just the seat, the belonging. I helped him pack for college, even though he barely looked up from his phone. I wrote notes on index cards and tucked them into his socks. "You've got this. Love, Mom." He didn't mention them, but he kept them. When he failed out the first year, I didn't yell. I let him move home. I said we'd figure it out. He crashed my car that winter, said someone sideswiped him in the parking lot. I found the dent on the passenger side clean and round. No scrape, no other marks. Later, I saw the bumper of his girlfriend's car. Same height, same paint fleck. I didn't say anything. I just paid the deductible. When he met Melissa, his future wife, he called her classy. I tried to make a good impression. I baked lemon cookies for her first visit. She ate one and said, so sweet, with that high-pitched smile that women use when they don't want to be unkind, but also don't want to lie. She never really took to me. I could feel it in the way she blinked a little slower when I spoke. The way her hand hovered near her phone, like she needed to be rescued from the conversation. I offered to host them for dinner once a month, my treat. I planned themed nights, taco bar, homemade pasta fondue. Melissa always ate neatly with just one napkin, never asked for seconds. James started calling less. When he did call, it was perfunctory. Hey, just checking in. No stories, no laughter. When they got engaged, I found out from Facebook. A photo of her hand in his ring flashing, captioned, "I said yes to forever." I called him that night and tried to sound excited. He answered like a coworker. "Yeah, we were gonna tell you. It just happened fast." I offered to help, to pay for part of the wedding. He said, "Don't stress yourself, Ma." Stress myself, as if that wasn't what I'd done since the day he was born. When he lost his job during the pandemic, I dipped into my retirement to cover their rent. Melissa said it made her uncomfortable. I said I didn't mind. James said nothing. A few months later, they posted a thank you message online to our incredible support system, especially Melissa's parents, who opened their home and hearts. My name wasn't in it, but I kept showing up. I kept offering. Because when you've built your whole identity around being someone's anchor, you forget how to swim without them. I thought the wedding would be the bridge, the return, the moment he'd realize I still mattered. I had no idea that the bridge was already burned. It was subtle, the way I began to vanish. Not all at once, not like a slammed door, but more like dust settling on furniture that no one touches anymore. The first time I really noticed it was during the wedding planning call. They were on speakerphone, James and Melissa, going over guest lists and music. I was in the kitchen stirring soup, the smell of thyme and carrots warming the room, trying to feel included. "I thought we could do a Beatles cover for the mother-son dance," I said, half laughing. "You used to beg me to sing Let It Be when you had nightmares." Silence. Melissa finally said, "Oh, we actually might skip that part. It feels kind of overdone." James didn't speak, didn't even sigh. He just moved on to the next bullet point like I hadn't said anything at all. I stirred the pot so hard it sloshed onto the stove. That night, I lay in bed and played Let It Be through my phone's tiny speaker, the lyrics tinny and soft, like something echoing from the bottom of a well. After that, I was no longer consulted about anything. They sent me a dress code link with Pinterest examples: sage green, dusty rose taupe. I emailed back a picture of the navy dress I bought, asking if it would clash. No response. I found out the florist was Melissa's aunt. The DJ was her cousin. The officiant was someone from her family's church. At brunch with a few coworkers, someone asked, "Are you helping your son plan the wedding?" I smiled and said, "Not really," and changed the subject before my voice could shake. There were moments that should have been loud moments that if I had been braver, I would have pushed back. But the truth is, I wasn't brave. I was tired. Tired in the way women get when they've been careful their whole lives, and it still wasn't enough to make them indispensable. The last time I visited their apartment, Melissa opened the door like I was a delivery person. She didn't hug me. She gestured toward the living room and said, "James is just finishing a call." I sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded. The kind of posture you use in a stranger's house. When he came in, he barely looked up. "Hey, Ma." He kissed the top of my head and turned to the fridge. There was a casserole dish in the bag I brought warm beneath the foil. I'd made it the night before, chicken tetrazzini, his childhood favorite. "Oh," Melissa said. "Thanks. I think we've got like 3 lasagnas in there already. I left it anyway." They never mentioned it again. And yet, I kept waiting. Like there was a line in the sand I hadn't crossed yet. Like if I was just kind enough, just patient enough, he'd come back to me. Then came the email. It was from a Gmail account they'd made for wedding updates, James and Melissa 2025 gmail.com. Subject line, seating and schedule logistics. The tone was chirpy. Melissa's style. "Hi everyone, first of all, thank you for being part of our big day. We're so grateful for your love and support." I scrolled. There was a PDF attachment with maps of the venue, a schedule of events, and a guest list. Under family seating, head table proximity, I saw bride's parents, table 1, bride's siblings, plus partners, table 2, groom's grandparents, table 3, officiant and partner, table 4. I kept scrolling. My name never appeared. Instead, there was a note at the bottom. "We've decided to limit head table proximity to immediate family only. Hope everyone understands it's a space issue more than anything space." The word hit like a joke, in bad taste. A week later, at the rehearsal dinner, I was seated at the far end of a long patio table, next to someone named Carl, who turned out to be the photographer's assistant. James made a speech thanking our families for bringing us here, and then turned arm around Melissa's waist and added especially the ones who raised us to believe in love. Her parents stood and took a bow. I smiled too. Reflex. That night at the hotel, I pressed a towel against my mouth and screamed into it. Not words, just sound. The kind of sound that wells up when you finally admit to yourself that someone you love is erasing you on purpose. Later, I opened their wedding website. There was a section titled, "Our Story." Melissa wrote about growing up in Connecticut and loving horses. James wrote about being raised by his incredible grandparents who taught me loyalty, humor, and grace. My name wasn't mentioned. I stared at the screen for an hour, not crying, just staring. The way you stare at a photo of yourself where you've been cropped out, but you remember exactly where you were standing. I clicked close window. Then I poured a glass of wine, went outside, and stood barefoot in the grass. It was a warm night, quiet, and I whispered to no one, "I think I'm done." The morning of the wedding, I woke up before the alarm. Not from nerves, just from the stillness, the kind of stillness that comes after too many nights of listening for a knock that never comes. I opened the hotel curtains and watched as sunlight spilled across the parking lot like it had nothing to apologize for. The dress I'd chosen hung from the closet door. Deep navy floor length, simple but elegant. I had it altered twice so the waist would sit just right. I'd bought a pair of pale satin heels, even though I knew my feet would scream by the end of the night. I still believed even then that maybe James would take one look at me and remember who I'd been to him. That something in him would shift. I spent too long on my makeup trying to strike a balance between effort and ease. I pinned my hair back the way he liked it when he was young. "You look like a movie star, Mama." I took one last glance in the mirror before stepping out the door and whispered, "Let this mean something." The venue was 2 hours outside the city, nestled in a vineyard, with white fences and pastel florals draped across wooden beams. It looked like a wedding catalog, like something you'd send your soul through a shredder to afford. When I arrived, the valet took my keys without meeting my eye. I stood near the fountain, waiting for anyone to greet me. I saw Melissa first, in a satin robe surrounded by bridesmaids with matching curls. She laughed loudly, a champagne flute in one hand, her phone in the other. She turned her head, spotted me, and nodded. Not a wave, not a smile, just a nod, like I was the caterer confirming a delivery. James appeared moments later, walking fast. "Hey," he said. He didn't hug me. "Hey," I echoed. I held out a small velvet box. Inside was a gold cufflink set I'd saved for engraved with his initials. "A wedding gift," I said. "Your father wore these at our wedding. I thought—" He took the box and gave a tight-lipped smile. "Thanks. Appreciate it." That was all. "Do I need to check in with anyone?" I asked. "Nah, just head to the reception tent after the ceremony." There'll be signs." Then he walked away, tucking the box into his pocket like a receipt. The ceremony was lovely. Melissa cried the right amount. James kissed her with just enough tenderness to make it believable. The guests sighed and clapped. A drone buzzed overhead, capturing the moment from a safe, curated distance. And then came the reception. That damn chart! I searched for my name as if searching for proof of my own existence. And when I couldn't find it, I walked in slow loops like someone trying to remember if they'd left the stove on. Then the groomsmen pointed. Then the sign. Then the laughter. But this time, something inside me didn't go still. It twisted. For 3 full songs, I sat beside that trash can. I watched people dance, toast, flirt, and throw their heads back with laughter. I saw Melissa kiss her father's cheek as he led her in a dance. I saw her mother clasp James's hand as he handed her a flute of champagne. And I realized something awful and liberating. At once, they'd already replaced me. I stood. I didn't make a show of it. I didn't grab a mic or throw my glass. I just walked straight across the floor through the crowd toward the bar. James was standing with a group of his friends, mid-laugh, mouth open, cheeks pink from wine. He saw me and smiled instinctively. "Ma," I said, "I'm going home." His smile faltered. What I stepped closer enough that he'd have to really look at me. "This is the last time you'll ever treat me like this." He blinked. "Mom, it was a joke." "No," I said. "It was a decision." Melissa appeared beside him, fingers tight around her bouquet stem. "God, it was a joke," she repeated with that same bored tilt of her head. I turned to her. I believed being kind would be enough, that being small would make room for your love. It didn't. James's jaw tightened. "Don't do this now." I nodded. "Exactly. Not now. Not ever again." Then I walked away. The air outside hit me like a revelation. The cold didn't sting, it sobered. I held my shoes in one hand, the gravel biting into my soles each step like a small awakening. In the car, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just drove. Past vineyards and barns and glowing porch lights. Past everything I had once built for him. And as the venue faded in my rear view, I whispered aloud, "You chose who your family is." I turned my phone off the moment I reached the highway. Let the silence wrap around me like something sacred. The wheels hummed against the road, a steady rhythm, one I could finally follow without having to brace for the next betrayal. I drove until the mountains were behind me, until the stars began to sink below the tree line, until my body ached from sitting still. When I reached the little motel off Route 9, the one I used to pass on weekend trips with James when he was small, I pulled in, parked beneath a flickering sign, and walked straight to the front desk. The clerk looked surprised. "Long night," I nodded. "I just need a bed." The sheets smelled faintly of bleach and something older like closet cedar and the ghost of old cigarettes. I undressed slowly. The zipper of my dress caught on itself, and I had to twist my arm awkwardly to unhook it. I let the navy fabric fall to the floor and stepped out of it like I was shedding a skin I'd worn for too long. In the mirror, I caught my reflection. Bare feet, bruised collarbone from where my purse strap had rubbed too long, mascara smudged beneath one eye. But I didn't look broken. I looked real. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence settle. In it, I could hear something faint but steady, the thud of my own heart slower now, no longer rushing to accommodate anyone else's comfort. The next morning, I made a choice. I didn't call him. Not after the first text came, "Ma, can we talk?" Not after the second, "I didn't know they were going to do that." Melissa thought it would be funny. I swear. Not after the third. "Please answer. I feel awful." I let them sit unread. There is something fierce in restraint, something alive in saying nothing. A week passed, then two, then Thanksgiving came. An invitation arrived in the mail, a gold-trimmed card with a printed note. Join us for a blended family feast. So thankful for love and growth. Love and growth. I stared at it for a moment. Then I dropped it into the recycling bin, closed the lid, and pressed the button on the bin's lid to hear the satisfying click of finality. Instead of traveling, I stayed home. I roasted a small chicken for myself, set one plate, played Otis Redding records, and let the music fill the corners of my quiet kitchen. By Christmas, I'd begun ignoring not just his messages, but the guilt. He sent a picture on Christmas morning, him and Melissa, in matching pajamas, holding mugs that said, "Hubby and Wifey." The caption, "Miss you today, Ma." But I didn't miss him. I missed the idea of him. The child I once knew. The boy who used to crawl into bed after a nightmare whispering, "I just want to be near you." That boy was gone. And whatever man stood in his place, whatever husband he was trying to become, he had decided I wasn't part of that story anymore. So I stopped trying to prove I belonged in it. In January, I joined a watercolor class at the rec center. I hadn't painted since high school, but something about mixing colors again made me feel unburdened. The teacher's name was Janice. She was 71, had white blonde curls, and wore hummingbird earrings. On the second class, she handed me a palette and said, "Don't try to make it pretty. Just make it yours." I painted crooked sunflowers, blue tulips, a house with no front door. Each week, I filled a new canvas, and each week, I felt less like a mother waiting by the phone and more like a woman who still existed without anyone else's permission. One afternoon, I met another student named Irene. She was quiet, wore layers even in spring. One day after class, she asked if I wanted to get coffee. Over cups of chamomile tea, she told me her daughter hadn't spoken to her in 5 years. She said I was too controlling, she explained. Maybe I was. I don't know anymore. I nodded. I was too soft. We sat in the stillness of mutual understanding. It was enough. By spring, I'd planted new flowers in the backyard. Pansies, zinnias, and marigolds. I tore out the old lawn chairs and replaced them with a porch swing I assembled myself. One morning, I stepped outside with my coffee, curled my legs beneath me on the swing, and opened Facebook. James had posted a photo album titled "Chosen Family." It was Melissa's birthday dinner. Her parents, her siblings, their children. My son smiled in every picture. I stared at his face, his arms wrapped around the woman who now told him where to place his mother, and I felt nothing. Not hatred, not pain, not even sadness. Just space. Finally space for something else to grow. There was no moment when I said I forgive him. No sweeping gesture of grace. No inner monologue about letting go. What came instead was quieter. A kind of absence. The absence of ache. The absence of need. I stopped wondering if he'd call. I stopped replaying the wedding in my mind. The trash can's seat, what a perfect metaphor. Unwanted, discarded, made to feel like a burden rather than a blessing. But even garbage, if you look close enough, has layers. Someone once said we throw away what we think we've used up. That's what I was to him, used. That thought used to crush me. Now it didn't. I began writing in the mornings. Not letters to him, I'd done enough of those in my head, but thoughts, images, memories I hadn't touched in years. I wrote about the first time James walked the way his hands curled into tiny fists when he was scared. I wrote about the smell of his baby lotion, about the soft humming I used to do when rocking him to sleep. I didn't write to preserve anything. I wrote to release it. One morning, I came across an old voicemail from him. It was from years back, his first job interview. He'd called me after, breathless and excited. "Ma, I think I nailed it. You were right about the eye contact thing. God thank you. Love you." I listened once, then I deleted it. Not out of anger, out of peace. Janice, my watercolor teacher, invited a few of us to her cabin for a weekend retreat. We painted from sunrise to dusk, ate simple meals, drank cheap red wine, and told stories about our pasts as if we were leafing through old albums together. I told them about the wedding, the seat, the sign. They didn't laugh. They didn't gasp. They sat with me in the silence after. One woman, Marla, reached out and placed her hand on mine. "That's not your reflection," she said. "That's their cruelty, not your identity." I almost cried then, not because it hurt, but because someone had finally said the thing I had been afraid to admit. I am not what they made me into. Later that night, we sat by the fire. Irene read aloud from a poem she had written about her daughter's silence. "I am the pause between her sentences," she said. "The ghost in the family photograph." I looked into the fire and thought, no, I'm not the ghost. I'm the one who stepped away before they buried me alive. By the time Mother's Day came around, I had no expectations. I had muted James's account months ago. But that morning, a knock came at my door. I opened it to find a delivery man holding a bouquet of tulips and a box of gourmet chocolates. "Elaine Holloway." I nodded. He handed me the card and left. Inside was a simple message typed in clean serif font. "Happy Mother's Day. Hope you're well. J&M." There was no warmth in it, just obligation. I left the flowers in the sink and the chocolates unopened. But later that night, I took one of my blank canvases, dipped my brush in the darkest blue I could mix, and began painting something entirely my own. A single chair, under a sky so vast it swallowed everything else. No name on the chair, no tape, no joke, just space, solitude, dignity. Weeks later, I opened the mailbox to find a wedding announcement from Melissa's sister. A mass mailing. I nearly tossed it without looking. But something about the envelope thicker than usual gave me pause. Inside, a folded thank you card slipped out. It was from Melissa. "Elaine, I know we've never really been close. I also know the wedding didn't go the way it should have. There are a lot of things I'd do differently now. I don't expect a response, but I want you to know that wasn't about you. Not really. I think I just didn't know how to let you in without feeling threatened. That's not an excuse. I'm sorry." I read it twice. Then I placed it in the same box where I kept old recipes, James's kindergarten drawings, and the birth certificate copy I never needed, but never threw away. I didn't call her, didn't text, but I didn't burn the letter either. That was enough. That week, Irene and I went to a bookstore cafe on a whim. We browsed poetry and sipped chamomile. She found a volume with pressed violets in its spine and handed it to me. "It reminded me of you," she said. "Resilient, beautiful, quietly defiant." I smiled. For the first time in a long while, I believed her. Summer arrived soft and slow that year, like it knew I needed gentleness. The world smelled different, like lavender and warm soil and possibilities. I spent my mornings barefoot in the garden, tending to my marigolds and basil plants. I kept the porch windows open, let the breeze move through the house without apology. I'd started sleeping with the bedroom door open again. I don't know when I first closed it, maybe years ago, when silence meant something was missing. But now, The quiet no longer echoed. It soothed. It filled. It wrapped around me like a second skin. Irene came by on Sundays. She brought pastries from the French place downtown, and we sat in the garden talking about everything but children. Art. Weather. Which birds nested in the oak tree. Her presence never asked me to prove my worth. It just let me be. I no longer felt the urge to explain myself. To anyone. One afternoon, I got a text from an unknown number. "Hi, it's James. Can I stop by sometime? Just talk. I miss you." I stared at the screen a long time. I imagined him standing on my porch, older than the boy I raised, holding some fumbling kind of remorse in his hands, like it could fix what he'd torn. And I imagined opening the door, or not. I didn't respond that day, or the next. But I didn't delete the message either. I went into the shed and pulled out the old box labeled James. His baby shoes were still in there, worn soft, too small for anything now. His drawings. The note he wrote me in 2nd grade, "You are my son." I held it in my palm and tried to match that version of him with the man who let me sit beside a trash can in my best dress. It didn't line up. It wasn't about whether or not he loved me. I know in some buried way he did. Maybe still does. But love that does not protect, that does not respect, that forgets you in public, what good is it? I placed the note back in the box and resealed it with clear tape. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't take it back into the house either. A few weeks later, Irene and I went to a gallery opening at the community center. It featured local artists, most of whom were amateurs, all of whom had something honest to say. I submitted 3 paintings anonymously. One was of a woman standing in an open field. Her arms were outstretched, face lifted to the sky. No background clutter, no fence, just her and light and enough space to breathe. No one knew it was mine, until Janice spotted it and said, "This one feels like healing." That night, I found myself crying in the car. Not from pain, from release. There's a grief that comes when you finally stop waiting to be loved the way you once were. And on the other side of that grief is something else. Not joy exactly, but sovereignty. That was the word that came to me. I whispered it aloud like a spell. Sovereignty. I was no one's mother in that moment. No one's mistake. No one's burden. I was mine, entirely. That weekend I replied to James. One line. Not now. Maybe someday. I didn't expect an answer and I didn't get one. And that was okay. I watered my plants. I painted my crooked flowers. I learned to make risotto from scratch. I filled my own silences. I looked in the mirror and saw someone worth showing up for. Not because I had sacrificed everything, but because I had stopped sacrificing myself. A letter came from Melissa, this time handwritten. I understand if you hate me. I think about that day all the time. I didn't know how to be generous with you. I was too afraid. I don't expect forgiveness, but I needed to say this. I know what we did, and it wasn't fair. I folded the letter and tucked it into the same drawer as the wedding program. I didn't respond. Some acknowledgments are meant to arrive and sit quietly like guests who understand they won't be invited in. I saw a photo online months later, James holding a baby girl, their first child. I felt the familiar tightening in my chest. Then it passed, like a wave, like a storm that no longer belonged to me. I didn't comment. I didn't call. I just whispered, "Be better to her than you were to me." Then I stepped outside onto the porch where the sun had begun to settle in the sky like a promise. My swing creaked beneath me. The breeze smelled of cut grass and honeysuckle, and I was at peace. Autumn arrived like a hush. The trees flamed red and gold, shedding what they no longer needed, and I followed their lead. I let go. Not all at once, but in slow, quiet acts that felt like reclaiming parts of myself I hadn't touched in years. I stopped checking his social media, not as a test of strength, just because I forgot to. The compulsion was gone. My days filled themselves without his shadow stretching across them. Mornings belonged to coffee and paint. Afternoons to walks in the neighborhood with Irene, our steps in rhythm, our silences comfortable. One day, we stopped by a second-hand bookstore tucked between a bakery and a closed-down tailor's shop. It smelled like dust and stories. I wandered to the parenting section out of habit and found a worn copy of The Invisible Thread. I opened it to a random page. Sometimes love must be stronger than pride, but never weaker than self-respect. I closed the book gently and left it on the shelf. That night, I dreamt I was standing in the middle of a wedding reception, but there were no tables, no chairs, just one long hallway of doors. I kept opening them, searching. Behind each one was a version of James' little boy, teenager, young man. In every room, he looked up at me and asked, "Do you see me?" I always answered yes. But he never asked, "Do I see you?" I woke with tears on my pillow and the bitter taste of truth in my mouth. I didn't speak of the dream. Some things are meant to stay in the chest, like old coins you don't spend anymore, but can't quite throw away. One evening, I sat in the garden, a sweater wrapped around my shoulders, watching the sky soften into dusk. A car passed, then another, then silence. Then headlights slowed in front of my house. A familiar shape. James's car. He parked, but didn't get out. I waited. After 2 minutes, the engine turned off. Still, he didn't move. I watched him through the window. His hands gripped the steering wheel. His head leaned back against the seat, then forward, then back again, as if deciding whether to knock or leave or cry. I didn't go out. Eventually, he started the car again and pulled away. No message followed. He hadn't come for me. He'd come for absolution, and I had none to give. That night, I painted a field of poppies. No sky, no figures, just the flowers. Dense, chaotic, wild. They looked like they were laughing, dancing even. I wrote on the back of the canvas, "We do not owe our gardens to those who trampled them." The next week, I framed it and hung it in the hallway where his graduation photo used to be. Irene came over for dinner. Homemade stew, crusty bread wine from a bottle we finished slowly. Afterward, we sat in the living room and she asked, "Do you ever miss him?" I didn't answer right away. I traced the rim of my wineglass with one finger, watched the candle flicker in the window. "I miss the version of him that needed me," I said. "But I don't miss being needed." She nodded. That's a hard thing to say. It took me a long time to mean it. The heater clicked on. The house groaned in the way old houses do, like it's settling into itself. Later, after she'd gone home and the dishes were put away, I stood in the doorway of what used to be James's room. The posters were long gone. The bed had become a daybed, the walls now lined with shelves of art supplies and paperbacks. I stepped inside, ran a hand along the edge of the desk where he once built Lego towers and later scribbled angsty lyrics. I whispered, "I hope you're a better father." Not a curse, a wish. I don't know if he'll ever come back. Not truly, and I don't know if I'd let him in if he did. But I've learned something in the space he left. My love was never the problem. My silence was. Not anymore. Winter came in quiet this time. Not with a storm, but a slow cooling, the kind that curled into your bones and made you move slower, think longer. I pulled out the thicker blankets, added cinnamon to my coffee, and let the chill linger in the corners of the house without rushing to fill it. I spent more time alone, not out of sadness, but choice. Solitude no longer tasted like abandonment. It tasted like calm. I wrapped it around myself like a shawl. The nights were longer. I lit candles early. I found myself reading again real books, not articles or threads or updates. The kind of stories that unfold slowly like hands unclenching. I read one about a woman who starts walking after her daughter stops speaking to her. Just walks. Through towns and seasons and pieces of herself. I closed the book and held it to my chest. Not because I saw myself in her, but because I didn't need to anymore. Irene left town in December to visit her son. They hadn't spoken in nearly 6 years, but he reached out just after Thanksgiving. She called me from his driveway, her voice shaking. "I'm terrified," she said. "Go anyway," I told her, "even if it's just to know you tried." She did. And when she came back, she brought me a snow globe from some roadside diner, inside a small ceramic cabin. White flakes settled over the roof like forgiveness. I kept it on the windowsill. Christmas came and went. No card, no visit. I wasn't expecting one. I decorated anyway. Hung garland on the banister. Lit a wreath-shaped candle on the table. I made a meal for one and didn't dress up. I let the day be simple, real, free of expectation. Then on New Year's Eve, a letter arrived. Not a card. A letter. Handwritten, folded into thirds, sealed with a shaky strip of tape. My name on the front in James's handwriting. The same loops he had when he was 12, only harder now. Tighter. I held it for a long time before opening it. "Mom, I don't know how to start this. I've written and rewritten it a dozen times. Melissa said I should just send it as it is, and she's probably right. So here it is. I was cruel to you. I didn't think I was being cruel at the time. I thought I was protecting Melissa, or avoiding conflict, or being modern about boundaries. But none of that justifies what happened at the wedding. I laughed. I let others laugh. I watched you sit beside a trash can, and I didn't stop it. I hate myself for that. I don't expect you to forgive me. I wouldn't if I were you. But I need you to know I remember everything. I remember how you stayed up with me through fevers. I remember the time you drove through a blizzard to bring me my retainer because I forgot it at home. I remember how you smiled when you were exhausted, how your hands were always moving, folding, cooking, reaching for me. And I remember your silence when I hurt you. That was the loudest thing I've ever heard. Melissa is pregnant again, another girl. I think about the kind of parent I want to be, and I know I can't be him without facing what I've done. If you ever want to talk, I'll be here. If you don't, I'll still be here. This time, I'll wait. Love, James. I folded the letter and placed it in the same drawer as the others. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I sat with it, let it exist. That was all I could do. Later, I stepped outside. The wind bit at my cheeks sharp and cold, but the stars were bright. I could hear the faint sound of fireworks in the distance, someone's countdown spilling into the sky. I stood on the porch in my slippers and whispered, "Happy New Year," not to anyone, not even to myself. Just into the dark. Back inside, I turned off all the lights except one. The room glowed with a soft amber halo. I made tea, sat by the fire, let the world keep turning. I didn't know what I would do next. But for the first time in years, I knew it would be my choice. Spring arrived in fits and starts, like a child waking from a long nap, irritable tender, unsure of its own body. The first crocuses appeared through the frost, trembling in the wind. I bent down to touch one of the petals like silk paper, trembling beneath my fingertips. Life was coming back, even in places I hadn't thought to look. I opened all the windows one morning and let the air move through the house, wild and sharp with promise. Dust rose in the sunlight, and I didn't sweep it away. I just watched it drift. The letter from James stayed in the drawer for weeks. I didn't reread it. I didn't analyze it. I let it sit where it belonged, among other artifacts of a past that had shaped me, but would no longer claim me. Then one day, in early April, I received a text from an unknown number. "Hi, this is Melissa. I wanted to let you know I had the baby. Her name is Clara Elaine. James said it was okay to tell you. I hope that's okay. Clara Elaine. My name placed in the middle of a child I might never meet." I stared at the message for a long time, not sure what I was supposed to feel. Gratitude, pain, regret. I felt all of it, and then none of it. It moved through me like a current I no longer had to fight. I didn't respond, not because I didn't care, because I didn't know how to say what I felt in a text. I went to my garden instead. I planted zinnias, sunflower seeds, lavender. I worked until my hands were raw, and dirt filled the creases of my fingers. The next morning, I got another message. "Would you ever want to meet her?" No pressure, just think about it. I carried the phone with me that day. Not obsessively, just close. Like a stone in my pocket. Something to remind me that I was being invited, not expected. That distinction mattered more than anything. I waited a week before responding. Then I sent one line. "Let's take it slow." Melissa replied, "Thank you, whenever you're ready." There was no push, no guilt, just the gentle offer of a beginning. A few days later, I got a letter in the mail, not from either of them, but from Melissa's mother, a woman I'd never truly spoken to. "Elaine, I know we've never had a real conversation. I didn't reach out before, because truthfully, I didn't think it was my place. But after Clara was born, I saw something in James I hadn't seen before. Regret, longing, and I saw Melissa watching him hold that baby like he was holding something breakable for the first time. She said your name with reverence. I don't know what happened between you all. I only know this: sometimes people grow backward before they grow up. I hope you find a way back to one another. Not because you owe it, but because love like yours deserves a second chance." I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. I did both. I called Irene and read her the letter. She listened quietly and then said, "So what do you want?" No one had asked me that in so long, it almost felt like a trick question. "I want peace," I said, "and I want to be seen, not just remembered when it's convenient." "That's not too much," she said. "That's the bare minimum." The next week, I drove to the edge of town where they lived, parked 2 blocks away, and walked past their house without stopping. I needed to see it first. I needed to feel the ground beneath my feet before I ever stepped on their porch. The house was pale yellow with white shutters, wind chimes by the door, a stroller on the porch, toys near the garden. It looked like a life I had once imagined, now occupied by others. I turned and walked back to my car, but I didn't cry. I slept well that night. Days passed. Clara turned 1 month, then 5 weeks, then 6. A photo came: James, holding her eyes closed, her tiny fingers clutching his thumb. He didn't caption it. He just sent the image. I printed it. I didn't frame it. I placed it in the drawer with the letters. One day, maybe she'd open it, and know she came from more than silence. That even when people break each other, something of love can still remain. The next time Melissa reached out, she invited me to a small picnic in the park. No pressure, just them, just space. I said yes. I bought a new blouse. Not for them. For me. Something soft with color. A little wild like the poppies I'd painted. When I arrived, Clara was asleep in her carrier. Melissa looked tired, real. James stood when he saw me. "Hi," he said, voice quiet. I looked at him. Really looked. The lines around his mouth. The way his shoulders slumped forward, not out of defeat, but effort. "Hi," I said. He didn't hug me. I didn't offer. We sat on a blanket in the sun, said small things, let time pass. When Clara stirred, Melissa lifted her gently and turned her so I could see her face. "She has your eyes," she whispered. I nodded because it was true, and I didn't say anything more. I didn't have to. I started seeing them now and then. Not regularly, not ritually, just enough that the space between us began to hold something new. Not the old bond, something else. Something slower, warmer in places, still cold in others. The first few visits were short. Park benches, coffees, small walks with Clara in the stroller. They let me set the pace. And I did. Carefully. One cautious, intentional step at a time. James didn't talk about the wedding. Neither did I. We spoke in the present almost like new acquaintances trying to figure out how much history to admit. Sometimes I caught him looking at me like he was trying to measure the damage, what he'd broken, what he could salvage. I didn't offer him any blueprints. One afternoon in the early summer, we were at a small botanical garden on the edge of town. Clara toddled between the flower beds, giggling sunlit and soft in her overalls. Melissa sat on a bench, bottle in hand, and James knelt by the rose bushes, watching his daughter with the kind of reverence I used to have for him. "Do you remember when you brought me here?" he asked, without turning around. I didn't answer right away. "You were maybe 9, I finally said. You'd just finished that school project on insects and begged me to take you somewhere with pollinators. You were obsessed with butterflies. I remember," he said. "You packed us peanut butter and honey sandwiches, and we stayed until the sprinklers came on." He looked over his shoulder at me. His eyes weren't wet, but they held something tender, something unfinished. "You made me feel safe," he said. "I never told you that enough. I didn't look away. You told me plenty. Then you stopped." He nodded, and the silence that followed wasn't sharp. It was soft, honest. We walked through the rest of the garden without speaking. Sometimes that's the only way grief makes room for something new. That night back home, I sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees and watched the wind play with the edges of the newspaper I'd left on the table. The world kept moving, folding itself forward whether I was ready or not. I opened a fresh canvas and started a new painting, Clara's hand reaching towards something out of frame. Not grabbing, just reaching. The next week, Melissa asked if I could babysit for 2 hours while she ran errands. She asked gently, without assumption. I said yes. Clara was fussy when they dropped her off. I rocked her slowly, sang the same lullaby I used to hum to James. She didn't settle right away. But eventually, her body grew heavy in my arms, her head pressed to my collarbone. I didn't cry. I didn't imagine redemption. I just held her. When Melissa returned, she lingered at the doorway for a moment, watching us. "She loves you already," she said quietly. "I'm not here to replace anything," I replied. "I know." She reached for Clara, who stirred and sighed and curled back into her mother's chest. I'm sorry, Melissa said again. Not out of obligation. This time it sounded like the truth. I nodded. We all carry shame. The question is whether we build from it or bury it. She nodded back and left. Later that week, James sent me a voicemail. Not a text. His voice was raw, unedited. I don't expect us to go back to before, but I want you in Clara's life. I want her to know who you are. I want her to know the woman who raised me when it wasn't easy. He paused. And I want to be better. For her. For you. I didn't call him back, but I saved the message. Irene and I sat on my porch one evening, sipping iced tea as the sky turned pink. Do you feel different? She asked. I feel like I came back to myself, I said. Like the version of me I left behind when he stopped needing me is still here whole, quieter, but not gone. She smiled. That's not just healing. That's power. No, I said. It's peace. In the weeks that followed, they visited again. Small visits. Clara would crawl across my floor, tugging at curtains, babbling to her own reflection. James would sometimes read her books aloud. Melissa would bring over a container of soup or a loaf of banana bread. No one made speeches. No one tried to define anything. They left space, and I filled it. Carefully, authentically. One afternoon, Clara reached for my hand without looking up. Just slid her tiny fingers into mine and kept going. That night, I painted the moment from memory, our hands side by side hers, so impossibly small. I titled it After the Storm. It was Clara's first birthday when James asked if I wanted to sit at the family table. He said it gently, not with the brightness of someone fixing something, but the quiet caution of a man who had learned what not to assume. We were standing in his kitchen. Clara was smearing banana on her high-chair tray, humming to herself like music lived in her bones. Melissa was outside hanging paper lanterns. The air smelled like frosting and grilled chicken, and for the first time in a long time, their home didn't feel like a room I'd been locked out of. You don't have to, James added. I want you to know you're wanted there. I looked at the chair he was pointing to, one with a pale blue ribbon tied around it, just like the others. No sign, no tape, no garbage bin nearby. Just a chair, just a place. I said I'll think about it, and I meant it. I didn't want to sit at any table because I was finally being remembered. I wanted to sit only if I believed it came from recognition. When the guests arrived, I hovered for a bit, talked with Melissa's mother briefly, said hello to a few people I vaguely remembered from the wedding. Some looked surprised to see me. Others offered polite smiles. It didn't matter. I wasn't there for them. I stood by the garden as Clara toddled toward the cupcakes, James trailing behind her with cautious hands. He didn't try to force her into his lap or pose for photos with forced perfection. He let her move, let her exist. He was different now. Not all the way, but enough. As the singing started, "Happy Birthday, Dear Clara," I felt something soften in me. I stepped toward the table, slowly, purposefully, and I took the seat they had saved. The blue ribbon brushed the back of my legs. The sun warmed my shoulders. No one clapped. No one even noticed, not really. And that was the gift. Melissa passed me a napkin and said, "We saved you the lemon cake." I thanked her and accepted it. Took a bite. It was a little too sweet, but good. Real. Clara smashed hers into her hair and giggled with that wide-mouthed abandon only babies can carry without shame. Everyone laughed. James leaned toward me just slightly and said, "Thanks for coming." I looked at him, saw the tired eyes, the laugh lines, the small flicker of something raw and rooted in his voice. "You're welcome," I said. And that was it. No grand reckoning, no speech, just the slow rebuilding of a bridge that would take years to cross fully if it ever was. Later that evening, after most guests had left, I stood by the fence watching fireflies emerge from the grass. James came up beside me. "I still think about that day," he said. "The wedding. The chair." "I know," I replied. "So do I." He didn't try to explain again. Didn't rehearse excuses. "I was afraid of how much space you took up in my life," he said. "I think I needed to shrink you to feel like an adult." I looked at the fireflies blinking in and out of the dark. "You didn't need to shrink me. You just needed to grow next to me." He nodded. "I see that now." I didn't answer. Some truths are not doors to be walked through. They're windows. You look out of them and move on. That night, Clara gave me a kiss on the cheek before she went to sleep, sticky and warm and perfect. I held her for a moment longer than necessary, and then I let her go. I drove home with the windows half down. The moon was high. The air smelled like night jasmine. I parked, stepped inside, and left my shoes by the door. In the hallway, I passed the painting of our hands and ran my finger along its edge. The silence in the house didn't feel empty. It felt clean, held. That night, I slept without dreaming. Some things were never restored, and maybe they never needed to be. The seat at the wedding, the one by the trash can, still lived in the back of my memory, like a bruise that no longer ached but hadn't fully faded. But I no longer sat there. Not in my mind, not in my life. I had my own chair now. One I chose. One that didn't require shrinking to fit. There are kinds of love that fracture us, and kinds that return quieter and more uncertain, asking for space instead of forgiveness. I don't know what James and I will be 10 years from now. I don't need to know. What I know is this: I didn't disappear. I didn't vanish in the face of cruelty masked as humor. I stood up. I walked out. And I built a life beyond the table I was denied. Some treasures had been recovered. Others more valuable still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.